There was an article that created a lot of ripples in the Apple sphere, and it was an article that was, I think, deliberately provocative is a good way of setting it up. It was an article about Apple and Safari. Safari famously comes from KHTML, which was a Linux-based web browser. It became WebKit, and Apple made the Safari browser on top of WebKit. And now the charge has been made that Apple and WebKit are no longer really good internet citizens, that they do not support the most current standards, things that are in essence designed to make web apps function more like native applications. And the provocative charge was that Safari is becoming the new Internet Explorer. Some people are saying that, that's not the right analogy, that what Safari is doing may not be good, but it's actually different than Internet Explorer. But Andy, you've been using browsers, I'm guessing, for quite a while. Do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading it, and as always, when you're talking about fundamental core web browser technologies, my usual response is to nod thoughtfully and then email a bunch of people I know who actually develop for the web. And I mean, this piece, I've read it a few times, and he lands a few points. There's maybe a larger question that every single browser needs to sort of needs to suit the needs of the internet in general, and that real good change does not happen until you have a standard that can elevate every single web app that's out there. And but you're not going to get that to happen unless all the core players support it. For instance, like imagine, to put it one way, imagine that Flash were actually good. And actually healthy for people and doesn't wind up tearing out big chunks of your frontal lobe every time you try to use Flash content. Imagine it was actually important, but then imagine that Apple decided that, no, we're not going to support it. That means that it's not only bad for Safari users, but it's also bad for that standard as well, because developers are not going to want to target it if they know that one of the most popular browsers on the planet is going to use it. However, my larger view is that, wow, there's so much crud inside the browser already, and there's so many competing standards that I want a more streamlined, more efficient platform, not a more complicated one. And so although it's very, very important for the browser to stop being just simply a way to display content and to start being an actual active app platform, Apple doesn't necessarily have to do that by destabilizing its browser and making sure they're adopting every single standard that's being proposed, as good as those standards are. And the reason why they don't necessarily have to do that is because there's Chrome, Google Chrome, which is an exceptionally good browser that is very ambitious in supporting standards. And if there is a standard that needs to be supported and Google supports it, well, that checked off the list. And if it turns out that Safari users are getting sort of pushed to the back because there's an app standard that is not being supported, Apple knows that. Apple has tried it. Apple has implemented it. Apple has definitely thought about it. And the reason why they're not supporting it right now is not because they're trying to be no good nicks. It's because they simply don't believe in it. But if it becomes a popular standard, as proven through the Chrome browser, Safari will have it very, very quickly. So interesting food for thought, but I thought it was pretty much a non-issue.
Just to name some of the services that it's Nolan Lawson who wrote the article, and I had a couple nice Twitter conversations with him, and he's been actively talking to the Safari team. So it's not like he's just someone who wants to yell and throw rotten fruit at Apple. So basically, there's Service Worker, which lets you have background tasks so the browser can send notifications. There's Web Components, which are reusable widgets for the web. There's Shadow DOM, which means that you don't have to cram everything into the main document object model of the web. You can just make subsets of that can do specifically encapsulated and isolated things. And there's Manifest, which is a centralized metadata repository for web apps. There are other things like there's been errors. I forget what's called ID Base. It's a database service, I believe, for the web that Apple has been either slow or not prioritized in developing. Ashley, Dropbox is both a web platform and a native app platform. Do you have a feeling one way or another?
I thought this was a really thoughtful piece. It's interesting. I sort of like what Andy brought up about the fact that Safari is leveraging Chrome as their guinea pig, are the testing ground, so to speak, and letting them sort of prove out whether or not these are standards they should even adopt. I know internally in Dropbox, we have to support Internet Explorer, Safari, and Chrome. And I haven't heard too many rumblings about support not being offered in one browser or the other. So this piece actually a little bit surprised me. I can tell you personally, I picked up Safari and became a user while working at Apple. I was sort of encouraged, I would say, by my coworkers. And only recently, within the past 2 weeks, have I actually switched to Chrome for work. Honestly, it was just a speed thing. I just found, I know the tests sort of prove that, or I've seen tests and statistics that say that Safari is fast, right? But I wasn't finding that in my own personal use. And so I find the timeliness of this article to be most appropriate given like my recent switch back to Chrome. So it's interesting.
One of the interesting things that I saw was that people think it's strange to think that Apple has limited resources because they're one of the richest companies, most successful companies in the world. But there's a limit to those engineers. An engineer can't work on feature A and feature B at the same time, so they have to make choices. And some of Apple's Safari members have spoken about this and said that they didn't have time to prioritize some of the things that were on this list, but they did do things like iCloud Keychain, like Safari Web View, like the extensions for content blockers. Ren, is there a difference maybe between the priorities of a company like Apple and our priorities of a company like Google or Firefox?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think every company is going to have their own priorities and their own focuses that they believe are their tier one, top of the line issues. A company like Apple is very, very interested and focused on security. And obviously they're focused on making sure that they have a fast and strong, stable platform. And I feel like with WebKit and everything else, they've constantly been pushing the bar and pushing the envelope when it comes to Safari. And unfortunately, I mean, we see this in iBooks. We see this in iBooks, which is basically a WebKit skin over sort of the EPUB framework, where, iBooks Author is a great example of something where the EPUB framework wasn't where Apple wanted it to be, so they added a bunch of custom specialty CSS classes that no other browser can read and no other ebook reader can read because they wanted to do special things that they just could not do, could not build with the standard framework. So I don't necessarily think it's Apple or it's these other folks going away from the standard and eschewing the standard, saying poo-poo to it. I think it's very much, we want to try these new things and we want to experiment. And sometimes the standard takes a little bit of time and we are 100% committed to the standard. But at the same time, we're not going to stop innovating just to wait on a standard, checkbox to get checked so that it comes down the pipeline.